When it comes to influential video games, few are more iconic than that of a Street Fighter series. Whether we are talking about the franchise rejuvenating the arcade industry in 1991, or the critical and commercial success of this year's game Street Fighter 6, these titles' impact is undeniable. Part of this brand's charm and popularity has in part always been down to its memorable and amazingly designed character roster. Before Street Fighter 2, there had never been a video game where you could play as such a diverse range of fighters. Not only could you play as different warriors from all over the world, but you could even play as women, destroying male opponents with a fearsome Chun-Li and, not long after, combat-ready Cammy. Whether gamers happened to be male or female, most would have agreed that both of these ladies were awesome. In fact, when we consider that 30 years later, both of these characters are still mainstream, it's not that they were awesome, they are awesome. So if this is the case, why are there still so many so-called game journalists moaning that these fighters need to change, and even worse, making derogatory statements such as calling Street Fighter fan service sexist? That's a pretty strong accusation without a solid argument to back it up. Holding these thoughts as someone who has been a passionate Street Fighter fan for 32 years and counting, let's discuss some of these scandalous claims and see whether they have any validity whatsoever. With that said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is defending Street Fighter against a game journalist who wants to see your beloved franchise completely changed due to sexism. Yeah. I have to say, I absolutely adore being a full-time professional YouTuber and entertaining you all by making these videos, but like for most of you watching this right now, the downside is I have to spend an unhealthy amount of time looking at screens. This feels almost unavoidable in the dystopian future we find ourselves in, as video games, work, internet usage and more all require us to use blue light producing screens. This constant use of monitors can cause serious eye damage, and I find myself regularly getting headaches from the eye strain, with it at times causing me to have trouble falling asleep as well. It is so annoying as to get anywhere, there is no way around looking at these torturous devices. Thankfully, I finally have a solution. My GMG Performance eyeglasses, which acts as a shield against irritating blue light. Wearing them improves my concentration and encourages my eye reflexes, helping to maintain the quality of my vision over the long term, not to mention improving my sleep quality. I already looked dashing in my top hat, but look even more ravishing in a pair of these spectacles. I have tried out both their Optimizer and Oranos models, and I personally prefer these ones, as they make me look like a sexy librarian. Since wearing them, their blue light blocking capabilities have made me more confident to work longer hours with less worries about getting a migraine. Want to become both stylish and sensible like myself? You can get a massive 40% discount, but make sure you do it now, as this huge offer ends 48 hours after the release of this video, so don't miss out. So click the first link in the description and get 40% off GMG Performance blue light glasses now. Yeah! For historical context, since their inception, video games have always been under attack in one way or another. In the days of Street Fighter 2 and the early Mortal Kombat games being mainstream, for example, it was mainly censorship-hungry Bible-bashing sorts who most wanted to take gaming down. Street Fighter 2 and fighting games in general were not only regularly accused of promoting and inciting real-world violence, but the case was often put forward that the genre was normalising male violence against women. The point I am making is people have always had bad takes on this sort of thing. But now, it doesn't seem so much that Christians are angry about women's depictions in Street Fighter, but apparently so-called inclusivity enthusiasts who want to burn down everything that the mainstream populace enjoys, so that it can be sanitized, then rebuilt to align with their niche worldviews and political agendas. To make this all the more hypocritical, the way these people want video games to be reimagined does not reflect what is popular around the vast majority of the planet, but instead corners of just the most privileged areas of the West. So with all of that said, let's start looking at the criticisms against Street Fighter from an article causing a stir. CBR.com uploaded a piece by a journalist named Kirsten, provocatively titled "Street Fighter 6 didn't have to embarrass itself with sexist fan service," an awesomely clickbait title which is sure to generate clicks. But praise aside, can this writer back up such a strong headline with a coherent argument? Well, not in my opinion. Firstly, I want to point out that this article is full of cherry-picked information presented to benefit the author's confirmation bias, intended to push a specific agenda. But for the sake of entertainment, as a genuine Street Fighter fan, let's be petty and demolish it anyway. To the writer's credit, the opening sentence this article presents is an absolute banger, offering a spicy hook that is sure to garner some reaction from the readers, with it reading, Street Fighter is no stranger to hypersexualized female characters. From Cammy to Juri to Chun-Li, it's a tradition the Street Fighter franchise needs to end. Once again, from one content creator to another, that's good writing as my attention was instantly grabbed. However, what are you bloody talking about, Kirsten? We will talk about sexualization shortly, but whether the series has been sexualized or not, why would it be in either Capcom or the fans' interest to have traditions that made the game famous in the first place come to an abrupt end? That does not sound like a sensible business strategy to me. The journalist claims that despite an increase in call for equal and realistic representation in games, elements of sexism persists. While we have plenty of time to discuss the hot topic of sexism, let's touch on realism. Because since when has Street Fighter ever been a franchise about realism? You've got men throwing fireballs from their wrists, green beast monsters with electric eel powers, and women being able to beat up men in fights. If you made Street Fighter realistic, this person would lose their opportunity to live their feminist fantasy of being a tiny woman being able to beat up a member of the patriarchy. To be fair, if realism was implemented in the Street Fighter, we would all lose out regardless of having a radical political persuasion or not. Building on this, they would also write, the recent Street Fighter 6 has attracted criticism for its unapologetic sexist tropes, from allowing players to dress characters in excessively revealing clothing to cinematics with a disproportionate focus on women's bodies. While this sounds very interesting, who are these mystery offended players they are referring to? When they say attracting criticism from whom? Who are these people? For example, the journalist source is another person complaining about this, but they are just from another article from the same website. A bloody colleague working for the same website. That's the source given. As someone who has been making fighting game content every week online for the past 4 years, in my comment section I've seen nobody to my memory complaining that Chun-Li and Cammy need reimagining because they are overly sexualized. It makes me think these journalists are making a straw man argument for nothing but clicks. Which is good business, I guess. They would then outline that the gaming industry, while largely male-dominated, has always included women, not just as players, but as designers and producers. It's crucial for a beloved franchise like Street Fighter to be inclusive, both encompassing a wider spectrum of characters, and by welcoming gamers beyond adolescent heterosexual boys. To be fair to Capcom, the game already has dozens upon dozens of characters from all different continents around the world, offering up different combinations of moves and fighting styles. When they say inclusive, what do they even mean? On second thoughts, the more I read this article, the more I know what they mean. I guess the game does severely lack ugly, old, and overweight women. So what do they want? She-Honda? They would then add, the time has come for Street Fighter and similar games to evolve and represent a broader demographic in their gameplay and character design. Well, She-Honda would definitely be broader, that's for sure. The writer has a particular bee in their bonnet about how the female roster members in the game are dressed, taking particular aim at the first lady of fighting games herself for apparently wearing clothes that are too revealing, criticising her for wearing what they refer to as a high-cut skirt. Considering this sounds like a line that could have been instead written by the Taliban, this statement alone should be an instant red flag that this person not only has no idea what they are talking about, but they're clearly not as culturally aware as they try to present themselves either. Reading this article, they seem to view the world through a very specific Western lens, and believe that the whole gaming industry should be restructured around progressive, America-centric ideologies, completely forgetting there is a whole planet out there. Speaking of this, it appears that the journalist is not culturally aware enough to realise that this Chinese fighter, created in Japan, isn't wearing Western clothing, but is actually wearing a stylised variation of traditional Chinese garb known as the qipao. This item, sometimes referred to as the Mandarin gown, takes inspiration from the ethnic clothing of the Manchu people. Attacking short skirts serves to perpetuate their own narrative that Street Fighter characters are overly sexualized, rather than doing any actual research into what the characters are actually wearing in the game. You know, traditional garbs which mirror Chun-Li's culture. Building on this poor argument and the previous untrue statement about Chun-Li's clothing, this is directly followed up with another mistruth, with them this time claiming that While this was once a common theme for both genders in earlier iterations, male characters have gradually received more appropriate gear as the series evolved. This is a completely ridiculous thing to say, as both Cammy and Chun-Li show less skin than ever before when wearing their new Street Fighter VI main costumes, with some of the male characters in the game not only appearing much more handsome than ever before, but also in less clothing too. Here, for example, is Ryu in Street Fighter 2, and here is Ryu in Street Fighter 6. This man has received such an extreme glow up that even since Street Fighter 5 when he gained a beard, the fan base have been referring to him as Sexy Ryu. Now, fighting in the games with this manly beard, an extra 100 pounds of muscle, and appearing close to topless, he reeks sex appeal. This illustrates that the whole part of the article is based around something that isn't even true, and that's without even mentioning sexy male characters of the past, like the close to naked Giga Chads of Gil and Urien. Pair all this with the fact that Rashid is so good looking that he looks like the guy who was booted from a Saudi Arabian convention for being too handsome, it serves as another example for male fighters in this game being sexualized too. In fact, while on this subject, my wife Lady Decade was laughing when playing Street Fighter 6 as she noticed that for the first time she even found Zangief attractive now. Speaking of characters' looks, the next zinger of a quote would be, "This obviously diminishes Street Fighter's female characters by prioritising the male gaze, and not considering the game's potential players. Right now, Street Fighter is the least popular fighting game franchise with women, and only 7% of the game's players are female, but that's the result of Street Fighter's bad choices. Conversely, almost a quarter of Tekken's players are women." Interestingly, I tried to find the source for this particular statistic, but I came up short. But even if this was the case, the well-known adage of correlation does not necessarily equal causation comes to mind here. There is nothing here to indicate that it is the so-called sexualization of female characters causing potentially lower female player numbers. Not one piece of evidence has been presented, only conjecture. Speaking to my wife, who along with her sister both cite Tekken as their favourite fighting game, made me question them why. They would both place this down to childhood nostalgia and owning a Sony PlayStation, with its polygonal power and marketing appeal. This instantly offered up the Tekken series to a wider range of people than that of Street Fighter 2, a game that experienced its peak in popularity during the 16-bit era, when consoles were mainly marketed towards a teenage male audience. Despite this being purely anecdotal evidence, I feel the validity of this still holds up compared to the sourceless statistic that was used to feed into their narrative that Street Fighter is inherently sexist. The next statement made in the writer's bad faith argument sees them claim that the sexualization of female characters in Street Fighter is a creative shortcut at best to enhance player retention, with them then citing games such as Horizon Zero Dawn and 2013 Tomb Raider as examples of titles, in their own words, existing with female protagonists outfitted in more realistic, less ridiculous attire. They proved that substance, not cheap sexual tactics, can drive sales and player retention. Come on, Kirsten, be honest with yourself here. This is like comparing apples and oranges, with one game being a skill-focused, competition-based fighter with a purposely cartoony world and a roster of colourful characters, being compared to single-player narrative-based games with darker environments, more realistic tone, and adventure-focused gameplay. These titles could not be any more different. This is like comparing classical music to heavy metal and wondering why you're attracting different demographics. Once again, this tells us absolutely nothing. The CBR.com writer would next take aim at the way Street Fighter 6 characters make their entrances towards matchups. They state entrance and victory cinematics play a significant role in fighting games, offering players a deeper insight into their chosen characters. Street Fighter male fighters, for instance, often exude a sense of superiority or disinterest by posing or swaggering. I'd argue that these cinematics are used to help define the characters' personalities, and that the journalist's language about the male characters in the game is inherently negative. The fact the journalist sees all the males as being arrogant, and in her own words exuding a sense of superiority, tells you a lot more about the lens in which this writer views the world through than it does about the game. They then go on to complain about the females' entrances being sexualized, with female fighters only existing in the game as eye candy to appeal to the male gaze. But she later undermines her whole argument by mentioning the existence of Marisa, the sort of diverse character in Street Fighter they previously claimed in the article didn't actually exist. Amusingly, praising Marisa, they add her self-assured strut commands respect, portraying strength, without pandering to the male gaze. What is hypocritical about this is that they essentially describe the way Marissa behaves in the game as being the same as the male characters, but if you notice her writing tonality, Marissa is framed positively, whereas the males are framed negatively. Self-assured strutting and commanding respect sounds a lot nicer than describing someone as having a sense of superiority. I guess the main thing to take from all of this is that the journalist seems to genuinely believe Street Fighter games would sell better if female characters were made to appear less traditionally attractive in the games. With the exception of Marissa, I could make the argument that the journalist slut-shamed every female fighter in Street Fighter 6, criticising the way each of them dressed. This is Taliban style of thinking, which isn't very liberal if you ask me. You know what this reminds me of? An episode of Jubilee I watched this week that placed a group of feminists in a box and they were all told to guess which one in the group was a mole. They chose to boot the traditionally attractive female wearing a miniskirt out as they didn't believe she was a feminist as she looked too good. The twist was though, Jubilee revealed there was no mole and let the group turn on themselves for entertainment value, showing us that at least that group of feminists had a problem and bias against the conventionally beautiful looking woman. This assault against attractiveness is so insane to me and just comes across as a form of extreme jealousy for the most part. Especially as I think in general, regardless of gender, the average person prefers to look at attractive people on their TV screens rather than plain or ugly ones. In the UK, for example, it is common for women to spend a great deal of time watching Love Island and other content which is way more highly sexualized than that of Street Fighter. So I feel there are much stronger arguments to be had as to why women aren't particularly interested in Street Fighter, beyond the female characters apparently looking too sexy for them. Most women would not see this as a negative at all. Given a choice, if most people were honest with themselves, they're going to prefer looking at attractive people than not. It's simple biology on the most basic level. Regardless if this is true or not, maybe it could be fun to create a massive fat woman or a 100-year-old granny and add them to the already diverse Street Fighter roster. But saying Street Fighter needs to kill tradition or that it needs to stop embarrassing itself with sexist fan service is absolute poppycock that deserves to be picked apart. This game is beloved for a reason, and radically changing its identity would, in my opinion, only severely hurt sales. Long live Street Fighter, and more importantly, long live beautiful people. Yeah, cheerio.